starting with juvenile crime, I mean, it's absolutely out of control. Anyone who wants to tell you that they've got a handle or getting a handle on the juvenile crime crisis, it's ridiculous. I mean, we've got two juvenile prisons, we'll call them. They call them schools in Washington state that aren't even accepting new bookings of juvenile offenders because they are so overwhelmed with the offenders they already have. Because in this state, we coddle criminals up to the age of 25. So you don't even have to go to an adult prison at the age of 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, or 25, you can be at something like Green Hills School, where there are fewer rules and where you're not treated like an adult as you should be, even though you're in there for committing an adult-sized crime. So I've believed for a long time that, like, look, you know, if you've got a 13, 14, 15-year-old, it's their first crime. Do I want to throw them in prison and lock away the key? Of course, or throw them in prison. Lock them in prison and throw away the key? Of course not. I mean, I think that you have to make some concerted effort to try to put that child on the right track. So nobody's saying that. And so this idea that you have to coddle them, you know, from their first crime up until they commit a violent offense like a homicide or a robbery is just ridiculous. And it also shows in this state, frankly, that whatever we're doing at these two juvenile detention facilities in our state to try to rehabilitate juvenile offenders clearly isn't working, because so many of them get cut loose and then they go back out and they commit crimes. Gangs is an issue, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, it's not just gangs. There is this horrifying trend happening across the country right now. Washington state has been victim to it, and it has to do with these kids on social media, you know, getting all brave. And of course, our kids are in the throes of mental health crises. I think social media has a lot to do with it. They cannot form meaningful interpersonal relationships. There's also no consequences, whatever it is. But you probably heard this headline this week. So in Bonnie Lake, nearly a third of students are not at school in a middle school in Bonnie Lake this week because there were these online threats of like kill lists, where there were threats online saying, you know, students by name, I'm going to do something to them. Police, this is a clip from Cairo 7 on their report on it.
Kids pulled from school, police posted up outside. An unsettling start to the day after students reported online threats allegedly targeting their classmates.
Last night, like, I saw on Instagram that like kids were like talking about like a kill list and like threats.
Yeah, and so a lot of parents said, even though police came out and they said, we don't believe that these are credible, we think they're just social media posts. I don't blame a parent. If my parent was at a school, or if my child was at a school where somebody posted a kill list online and police are like, well, we don't think it's credible, I'm still pulling my kid out for the day and maybe the week. So there were a lot of parents who decided my kid's not going back to class while police investigate this. And as I said, what happened in Bonnie Lake is part of something that's been happening on social media across the country.
Since the deadly school shooting in Georgia, police across the country have reported a rise in online threats against schools. This month, students in at least 6 states have been arrested for making gun or bomb threats on social media.
Yeah, one of those happened in Florida. And I saw this clip. It's been going around on social media. And I just thought, this is the key. This is the key to try to meaningfully defer juvenile crime, stop juvenile crime, prevent juvenile crime, is to shame kids and to shame parents, frankly. To hold parents responsible for their kids' conduct. There was this sheriff in Volusia County, Florida, Mike Chitwood, who I'll talk more about what happened, but it involved an 11-year-old showing friends pictures of this arsenal of weapons, saying he was going to commit an act of violence at school. Well, this Sheriff Chitwood was livid, obviously, fed up with juvenile crime. He came out and gave one banger of a press conference.
Since parents, you don't want to raise your kids, I'm going to start raising them. Every time we make an arrest, your kid's photo is going to be put out there. And if I could do it, I'm going to perp walk your kid so that everybody can see what your kid's up to. The second point of this is, if I can any way find out that a parent knew what was going on and wasn't doing anything, your is getting perp walked with them. The purpose of Fortify Florida is to send in tips that we're going to investigate because you believe something is going to happen. To keep sending in these tips over and over and over again and think it's a big joke and nothing's going to happen to it. Starting Monday, we're going to have a billboard. We're going to have a poster out. I'm going to show you every kid that's been arrested and where they go to school. And then from there on out, we're going to publicly shame them and their parents. So parents, do your job. Don't let Sheriff Chitwood raise your kids. This is absolutely ridiculous. Go talk to the families who have lost a loved one in a school shooting. These little knuckleheads think it's funny. Go talk to those parents and see how funny this is. It's not. We're going to come and get you, and we're going to put you out for public embarrassment. And I know of a set of parents right now that they're looking at $11,000 each because somebody's paying this bill.
You make me clap by myself, Nicole? Jeepers. I mean, honestly, that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do because politicians aren't going to do it. There's obviously some parents who aren't monitoring what their kids are doing on social media. This example out of Florida, what that sheriff was talking about, it's insane to me to think that the parents had no clue what was going on because it has to do with this. Well, let me just show you the picture of the arsenal of weapons that the sheriff's office says this 11-year-old Carlo Kingston Dorelli apparently took a video of to show his classmates, made a threat of violence. It's like a stockpile of airsoft guns, knives, swords. I mean, I even see what do you call those things?
The slingshot.
Which, if it was just the slingshot, we wouldn't be here. But obviously, you've got knives, swords, airsoft guns, whatever it is, and he's showing kids a video of it, and he's saying that he's going to commit an act of violence. As a parent, how do you not know that your 11-year-old has that stuff? Right? I mean, I'm not a parent, but I assume most 11-year-olds don't have the money on their own to buy all of those things. I mean, realistic-looking airsoft guns, those aren't cheap. Where's the kid putting those? Where's the kid hiding those? That's not concerning to you at all? So that happens, and the sheriff comes out and he says, we're sick of it. We're sick of it. If you're not going to parent your kids, I'm going to do it for you. And he made good on his promise with this 11-year-old boy of doing a perp walk.
All right, sir, careful as you can. You're going to be walking over here to the gate over here, all right? Slow and steady. What you here for today?
Put that foot down. Let me get the other foot.
Shackle him up.
All right, come on in here. Have a seat in the cell. We're going to gather up some paperwork and get things started for you. Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
All right.
Lock him in. Hell yeah. I don't feel bad for that little kid at all. And I wish the sheriff had made good on doing it with the parents too. Like, hell yeah. I fail to understand. If you're a parent and you've got an 11-year-old, you explain to me how a child might be able to stockpile all those things and you not know about it. Somebody, because I'm baffled by it, right? So, I things like this challenge me because I don't believe that the government should be intervening in the household. We talk about that a lot with parental rights, knowing what's happening with your kids in school, etc. But when your child is doing things that are harming society, that's different, right? When your child and your failure as a parent or your lack of parenting or oversight or whatever it is leading your child to threaten other people, hurt other people, break laws, that's a very different scenario. And for this sheriff to say, if you're not going to parent your kids, I'm going to parent your kids, and their face is going to end up on a billboard and your face might too, and we're going to videotape a perp walk putting your 11-year-old boy in shackles and in a jail cell, and if that's what it takes to deter juvenile crime, then I say so be it. I asked you guys in our daily subscriber show poll, which I'll get to coming up later, please answer it if you haven't already on Patreon, Locals, and X. Do you think it's appropriate to put out a mugshot of a juvenile suspect, regardless of the age of that suspect? I'm very curious to hear whether you guys think that what this Florida sheriff did was too much, but I just don't know. The coddling juveniles clearly isn't working. We see that in Washington State. And if you're not taking it seriously from a very early age, what you're doing is you're giving them permission and you're giving them the idea that they can continue to get away with this sort of behavior. And that's where how you end up in the situation we're in Washington State. That's how you end up with a 12-year-old who was arrested in an attempted armed carjacking in West Seattle. The Seattle Police Department put out information on this. I've talked about this. There were some older suspects with this 12-year-old, but these kids are being used by older juveniles, sometimes young adults, to commit violent crimes because what do they believe? They tell these kids, they do. Well, you're not going to be held accountable. So why don't you, 12-year-old, do the armed carjacking? Because they're just gonna give you a slap on the wrist. If I do the armed carjacking, You know, if you're an older gang member, if I do it, I might actually do some time in prison. But you're 12, go ahead, do the armed carjacking, nothing's going to happen to you. And so they do, and I'm sure that very little is going to happen to this 12-year-old. But then he's going to learn that I can continue to get away with this sort of behavior. And what's going to happen is that empathy that we're showing these juveniles, because, oh, they're just 11 and 12 and 13 and we can't treat them like hardened criminals. Well, that empathy is going to lead to them becoming hardened criminals. That empathy, this misguided definition of empathy that the left has embraced, is going to lead to either that kid being the victim of a violent act that's going to take their life and cut their life short, or that child later on perpetrating a violent act that's going to land them in prison for the rest of their lives, like a homicide. And so I don't understand this early empathy. You can be empathetic for a young child that's home life is so bad, that's economic outlook is so bad, that they embark on a life of crime. You can feel bad for them. You can have empathy for them while still holding them accountable and their parents accountable for their behavior so that they don't continue down that path. And that's the balance that we just are failing to strike in Washington state with juvenile offenders. Empathy, but accountability. What did Chef Chad White say on the show yesterday?
Accountability is love.
Accountability is love. Where he was talking about the drug offenders outside his restaurant in Spokane, the criminals who've broken into his place 20 times in 8 years. And he's like, look, accountability is love. And man, that phrase rings true for juvenile offenders. If you love them, if you care about them, if you have empathy for them, then accountability is the only way to show it. And I mentioned, getting to the point where these juvenile offenders have gotten away with so much that they go on to do something that is either going to ruin their life forever or take someone else's life forever. And there was also an example of that in Washington state this past week. 2 teens arrested after fatal shooting at Sumner House Party. This is from Fox 13. This is a horrible case. So you've got kids, parents out of town. So kid throws a party in their parents' barn, disables all the surveillance video cameras, so their parents didn't find out that they were having a party at their house. At some point, there's these juveniles knock on the barn door, open it up, and open fire. Shot 3 people, 2 of them juveniles, and one of them, inexplicably, a 30-year-old. What is a 30-year-old doing at a party at a barn full of juveniles? That 30-year-old is dead. So you've got 2 juveniles shot and multiple other juveniles who are believed to have murdered a 30-year-old. And what do you think is going to happen to them? Their life is over. Because once you reach homicide, there are certain things that even our soft on crime policies can't get you out of. And murder in the first degree is one of those things. And if you're tried as an adult, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. So this is, to me, and I would love to hear more about this from, all the candidates really for public office running right now for November, but certainly the gubernatorial candidates and Dave Reichert. And there's a debate tomorrow. I hope this topic is brought up of juvenile crime. It's out of control, and we need a complete 180 in how we deal with these juvenile offenders. And frankly, and Dave Reichert has said this, that it starts with putting adult offenders in an adult prison. It starts with treating adult offenders like adults. That's like a very first step, right? Hey, you're 18, you're going to an adult prison because the law considers you an adult. We're not going to coddle you at Green Hill School till the age of 25. But it also means that when you've got these little gangbangers in Seattle and they're doing robberies of, where they're doing carjackings, they're stealing vehicles, that you have judges who understand that, hey, if I cut this person loose with no bail, no money, with just a promise to appear, that it's going to send a message that they can keep doing this. And we see this not just in Seattle. We've seen it in Pierce County. We've seen it in Thurston County. We've seen it in Snohomish County, where the same juveniles will go out, steal a car, get booked in jail, immediately judge lets them go. What do? They go out, they steal a car, they get booked in jail, judge lets them go. And that happens over and over and over and over and over again. And maybe the next time they steal a car or commit a carjacking, it's going to be against someone like Ruth Dalton, 80 years old. You're going to take her life, and then you're going to end up in prison for the rest of your life. This isn't rocket science. It really is not rocket science. I mean, look, I was not a perfect kid. And people might look at me and like, oh, well, Brandi, you didn't have the economic hardships that some of these kids have. Yeah, I did. I know I'm white and stuff and blonde and You know, there's not as much sympathy for little white kids or whatever, but I did grow up in economic hardship. And I was a little bit of a hellion. I think I've talked about this on the show before. I loved to party when I was a teenager. I had a dad who was an alcoholic, and clearly that wasn't enough to put me on the right track. And there was one instance when I was a juvenile that like woke me up where I'm like, oh God, I was a good student. I was doing all these things right, but I was still getting in trouble. And one of the things where I stopped getting in trouble is, you know, I got in trouble to the point where they took me to a holding cell for a jail. And I was like, oh shit. Like, I'm actually in big trouble this time. And so, you know, you need that wake-up call. And it's true across the board. And I know I'm belaboring this issue. We talk about juvenile crime so much. But you can apply that across the board, where consequences are part of what can set someone on a better path. Drug offenders, same thing. People are like, we can't throw them in jail. That's horrible. No, we should be throwing them in jail. How many stories have we heard of people like Ginny Burton, who was in and out of prison, and it was finally just one arrest that for some reason just stuck for her. And now her life is completely different. So if there's no intervention, there's no arrest, there's no consequences, they're not just going to wake up one day and say, nah, I don't want to do this anymore.